Hi, everyone. This is Alice and Jeff, and we're coming to you again with some good information about anxiety and stress. So, you know something about stress
I do.
because you're writing a book on stress,
That's true.
and I really appreciate talking to you about it. And I'm wondering if you could just give a little synopsis of your definition of stress, simple one.
Great. My simple definition of a stress is any demand on our attention or our energy that challenges us,
Right.
right? So if we're a child, that could be something very simple. When we get older, oftentimes it takes a little bit something more significant. So there's a developmental space inside that idea of what a demand is. In other words, a demand is subjective based on our own arc of our own development.
Mm-hmm. Great. And in terms of anxiety, I work with a lot of people. I'm a psychotherapist, in case you didn't know. And I work with a lot of people with their anxiety as well as my own anxiety. And so I know something about this. And we're kind of interested in talking about, the similarities and maybe some distinctions between anxiety and stress. And in terms of anxiety, anxiety is more the physiological response in your body to a perceived threat. It can also be generated from our own mind and our own worries. We can certainly get into habits in our mind around anxiety. But the way we were just talking about it is it's like the vibrational experience of a stressor is anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah, I think anxiety definitely has more emotional valence to it, right? Stress is, as a word is more neutral. Stress, often people think of pressure, a great substitute word that's a little bit more embodied than stress. Stress is more of an abstract idea, more of an abstract word, but pressure is something that we all feel. So that sense of either internal or external pressure, where anxiety does have that little bit of vibrato, is like the sense of what the string being vibrating rather than the stress being maybe the pluck.
Yeah.
You know?
Nice. I
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that. I like
yeah,
that
yeah.
metaphor.
Uh-huh.
So give us some sense of how you like to guide people to work with their stress.
Yeah, great. So one of the things I think the starting point with stress is that it's normal. That stress is one of the primary currencies of survival and of life. Pressure is what tells us that there's something at stake which we care about, something that matters, whether it's literally surviving or some aspect of something that we value or care about or feel subjectively or objectively significant to us. So, first of all, normalize and welcome that stress is an intrinsic fact of life. And that's one of the things that I do for myself is when I'm not liking something, remind myself, like, oh, yeah, that's right. Pressure, discomfort, demand on my system is gonna be part of my life experience, as part of my human experience, that I'm gonna feel some pressure.
Let's give a couple examples. Like I'm thinking of, if you're a teenager and you're coming up to finals right now, there's a demand on you. There's a pressure. You've got a bunch of finals all at once and you have to do studying and maybe you want to get good grades. That's one example. And then as an adult, there's plenty of examples. You just went and stressed yourself out on purpose and did this what do you call it?
Yeah,
Obstacle course,
it was a Spartan race that's also known as a Tough Mudder, but it's this physical event where in this case it was 10 kilometers, 6 miles of running up and down hills with some like adult obstacle course elements. So yeah, it was definitely a physical stress for sure.
That
My
you
body,
chose to do.
yeah,
Which
yeah.
is we can talk about that as actually one of the strategies of dealing with stress is like putting yourself through a physical ordeal in order to meet that pressure.
Right. That's like a practice,
Yeah.
right? We talked about practices a couple weeks ago. So you can have a stress-based practice, and a lot of people who do high intensity workouts or very demanding type practices are actually doing that. They're creating a stressful circumstance for themselves, which the body gets stronger from, which is kind of cool to know that, oh, actually, when we put pressure algorithms into our life experience, whether that's a physical workout, the demands of an academic journey, the demands of a learning journey, say a work skill, that then we actually, the deep homeostatic principles of the body register like, oh, okay, I need to adapt here. And so we can actually develop and grow, which is actually the upside of stress, right? Would be like Kelly McGonigal's language in her book. The upside of stress is there's wonderful things that come out of stressful experiences that don't when we're comfortable.
Right. Totally.
Right.
Yeah. So it's actually empowering. There can be an empowering element to meeting our stressors, overcoming them, or meeting the challenge.
In the right dose, right?
Yes.
And that's probably true with anxiety. I mean, how would you say in working with people who have strong anxiety, what are some of your basic tenet principles around that?
Well, one thing that I say, and we'll talk about evolution and stress and anxiety a little bit next week, is that people who have a little bit of anxiety tend to actually succeed more in life. Because if you are thinking about what could go wrong, or you're kind of planning for the future more, you tend to fare better in terms of being a successful human. And you don't want too much anxiety, because then you're immobilized, right? Which is the same with stress that you were just saying. It's like finding that balance point. If a little bit of anxiety is actually beneficial, but too much is not beneficial, is challenging. So that's one of them. The other ways that I like to support people in working with anxiety is on a few different levels. One is cognitively, is to be able to speak back to their anxiety and to, tell themselves, get rational about your anxiety. Because oftentimes, we're perceiving a threat that is not actually there. If the threat is there, you want your anxiety system to respond. But if it's not there, then you can get more rational. And then we can also talk back to our amygdala, or, our threat perceiving system in our brain.
You mean like the 100 times I've been hunted by mountain lions on hikes when it actually hasn't happened?
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of examples.
Yeah.
So that, and then I work with the physiology. So, we can affect our physiology. And we've talked a little bit about that when I talked about the physiological sigh, or the parasympathetic breath that I guided people through. And so being able to kind of downshift into your parasympathetic mode through your breath or movement, I think is really good to manage anxiety. And then the third way I coach people to work with anxiety is through parts. We're going to do a whole series on parts work at some point.
Super excited for that one.
Yeah. So, and working with an anxious part of us and getting more into our self energy, so we can relate to that anxious part, and that the anxious part can begin to trust that we'll know how to take care of ourselves and that we'll respond to a situation without the anxiety having to run the show.
Yeah, that's great. Because I have a similar idea to parts work in the realm of stress, which is that I think partly we get anxious when we're not sure if we can handle a stress. And a lot of times what the focus is on the outer event of the stress or the thing that's promoting the anxiety. But I think what's less spoken to is our capacity in the face of stress, right? Like, we emphasize, there's a lot of hard things going on in the world right now, which, naturally makes everybody feel a little bit more anxious, right? I'm also thinking about what Michael Meade says, that his definition for anxiety is the gap between the small self and the deep self, that the greater the sense of ego is lost from the greater whole of the world, the more anxious we feel. And it is really beautiful. And there's another way of saying that, which is that there's a lot inside us in terms of the deep self. I like to go evolutionary biology with it. We're actually deeply equipped with lots of resources to handle stuff. And if we weren't, we wouldn't be getting the anxiety in the first place that's paying attention to it, right? So we're in tune with subtle challenges or adversities in our environment. But it's also good to know that we have at least 4 parts of the stress response. One is energy. Second is focus. The third is we can socially connect and get support around our stress. And the fourth is we can consciously learn, that we can actually develop in relationship to our stresses, or in this case, anxieties.
So there are these ways to work with our stress. Is that what you're talking about?
There are ways to know that we're equipped, and there are ways to start paying attention that, yeah, we have an energy response, we have an ability to focus, we have ability to rely on others as social mammals, as social primates, and as humans, we can actually learn, develop, and grow. Maybe develop perspective taking, cognitive understanding, or engage the prefrontal cortex in order to kind of like bring balance to that instinctual signaling of fear that we can get that
Beautiful.
can give a lot of that. Yeah.
Great. Love it. So we'll get into some specific tools in terms of how to work with, I will at least, in terms of how to work with anxiety, how to do some of that prefrontal cortex orientation when it comes to working with our, more emotional centers of our brain. And I know you're going to talk more about, is it reverse engineering or?
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing to say in relationship is there's the cognitive prefrontal cortex side of dealing with both anxiety and stress is when we engage our conscious learning, or what you would say in anxiety, I think, perspective taking or mindsets. What would you say in terms of anxiety?
Cognitive restructuring. Okay. Yeah, helpful thinking is another way to put it.
Very simple, helpful thinking. But the other side is what you said is movement. And you talked about movement as a practice. One of the other ways of dealing with anxiety and stress is exercise or high intensity activity. In other words, we circulate or cycle through the physical stress response when we get active. And it turns out that the stress response, one of the main functions of it, is to give energy to our thighs, at least at a sympathetic level, right? So we have energy to fight or flight. So one of a real simple hack when you're feeling stressed out is to run flights of stairs, or do jumping jacks, or do lunges, or do a jump rope. And what that will do is it will help just metabolize that uprising of energy that comes when we feel anxious or stressed.
Oh, great. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Do you also tell people sometimes to slow the stress and anxiety response wants to speed us up in some ways, right? Like, okay, I got to get it all done. Do you ever tell people to go slow in order to go fast?
Not exactly that language. How do you tell me more about what you tell people?
Well, I feel like with stress that's helpful for myself, at least, is like when I get overloaded is actually to just slow things down, and I'll get, one thing done at a time instead of the overwhelm making me feel more frozen. And so if I do actually just tackle one thing at a time.
Well, this is the interesting thing about, it's more of a yin yang theory, right? So if you go more yin, it calms down the yang. But one of the interesting things is what I hear you talking about is fragmented focus. So focus is part of our stress response. But if our focus gets messed up for either our own cognitive reasons, or say someone is in our environment messing with our focus, what do we feel? Stressed out. Mm-hmm. So each of these assets that are allies for us in our stress response have a liability to them. Totally. And we can become vulnerable, which is good to know. Yeah. So in this case, the way I hear it in the language of stress is if I'm too busy with my energies, too ramped up, and it's actually the energies overwhelming my ability to be focused, that what I need to do is settle my focus. Nice. So then I can actually be successful with my response to my stress or what I feel anxious about.
So let's apply that to studying for finals, because I know it is kind of finals time.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm thinking like too much stress is going to impact our focus, right?
Yes.
A little bit of stress is going to help us get on it and study and, get down to it. So what would be a way that you would coach people that are about to take finals in relationship to that?
Yeah. Well, I would say I would use the anxiety that you feel as a call, not that there's something wrong with you, but you're anticipating and wanting to prepare for something that's important. So first, align with your emotions. Secondly, if you're feeling too ramped up and you can't focus, then you're looking at like basic balancing principles. Do I need to exercise? Do I need to rest? Do I need to eat so I can get into a better state of mind? And then watch your focus. We can't just focus forever. Like cramming obviously is a rough thing to do because these resources have biological rhythms too. Our energy has rhythm, the amount of focus we can do, the amount of time we can spend socially connected, etc. So I would try to build rhythm in relationship to each of those. In other words, not put a huge demand on my focus to get it all done right away. Or bite size it would be another way of saying
like
it.
little breaks.
Little breaks.
Take breaks.
Take breaks. And when you take break, either move or rest or
Mhm.
eat, depending on what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think usually that helps maintain the energy system in a good balance, and then focus will follow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, and similarly, if you have too much anxiety, like I mentioned, you're more immobilized, with too much anxiety, whereas a little bit of anxiety can get you motivated,
Yeah.
and just that, if you feel immobilized by your anxiety, again, we kind of get regulated in your nervous system.
Right.
Great. Well, there's a lot of information.
I know.
Like we're like a fire hose of information, not just a drip, but we are passionate about sharing what we have learned. And please connect with us through our different social media platforms. We would love to hear from you and engage with you on things that you're interested about and things that we're talking about here.
Word.